treating him like a new MLK. I'm seeing people saying he was a literal saint. He should have a statue put up in Congress. Chris, am I supposed to just let that go and not say, we probably shouldn't have a statue in Congress for a man who says Islam is a religion being used to slit the throat of the West, that Muslims like me are conquerors? This is the kind of stuff he said. Am I supposed to not respond to that political rhetoric?
We're about to watch Mehdi Hasan join Chris Cuomo on his show for a heated exchange with a MAGA-aligned right-wing guest centered around the rhetoric and reaction following the death of Charlie Kirk. And as you'd expect, the discussion gets intense, not just because of the subject itself, but because of how polarized and emotionally charged the conversation has become. As usual, Mehdi steps straight into the controversy with the calm, controlled delivery he's known for. Instead of getting dragged into the chaos, he focuses on facts, calls out hypocrisy where it appears, and pushes back against selective outrage that often dominates these discussions. Even as emotions rise, he keeps the pressure on by grounding his arguments in evidence rather than rhetoric. In this video, we'll go through the key moments from Mehdi Hasan's appearance on Chris Cuomo's show, break down what was said, and I'll give my take on how the exchange unfolded and why it resonated the way it did. Let's get into it.
The data is clear. People on the left are much likelier to defend and celebrate political violence. This is not a both sides problem.
They're already under major investigation. A lot of the people that you would traditionally say are on the left.
They're
already under investigation.
The last message that Charlie sent me, we need to have an organized strategy to go after the left-wing organizations that are promoting violence in this country. It is a vast domestic terror movement. And with God as my witness, we are going to use every resource we have at the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and throughout this government to identify, disrupt, dismantle, and destroy these networks and make America safe again for the American people. It will happen, and we will do it in Charlie's name.
3 quick points. 1, playing this to advantage is a mistake. 2, blaming a group for the act of an individual is a mistake and does nothing to encourage any different thinking. And 3rd, the statistics tell us a different story. We see violence from both sides. You can look it up for yourself. So the question is, what are we seeing in response to this? And what does it mean? Let's bring in Ken Cuccinelli, served as acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security in the first Trump administration, and Mehdi Hasan, founder and CEO of the media company Zeteo. And yes, Mehdi and I have been arguing on Twitter. I like Mehdi. I respect Mehdi. I don't care what happens on Twitter. He is always welcome to make his case. And anyone who thinks that I have any hostility towards him is making a mistake. Mehdi, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
All right. So let me start with you, Mehdi. How would you analyze what you're hearing in response to this murder from the left?
From the left? I mean, just listening to the clips you played from the Trump administration, we're in a McCarthyite moment right now. I've been listening to your show. You made a lot of good points. The biggest point I think you've glossed over is the crackdown on free speech, this targeting of people for their views. I thought Charlie Kirk was supposed to be a free speech martyr. Why are the right using his death to crack down on free speech and American rights and go after this amorphous left? J.D. Vance lied today on the Charlie Kirk show when he said the statistics are clear that this is a left-wing problem. It's the exact reverse. Right, exact reverse. You look at the ADL Center for Extremism, which looked at 444 people killed by extremists between 2013 and 2022, 75% of them by the right. You look at the University of Maryland study that was done for their terrorism center, which found that from 1948 to 2018, right-wing extremists more likely to carry out violence than left-wing extremists. You look at the head of the FBI, who Donald Trump appointed, Chris Wray, who said the #1 domestic terror threat in this country comes from religious and racially motivated extremists, specifically white supremacists. You can keep going. The National Institute for Justice found that the majority of incidents since 1990, violent terroristic acts, were right-wing extremists. The single biggest day of political violence, Chris, in our lifetimes in this country was January 6th, 2021, when right-wing extremists attacked the Capitol, injured police officers. They were ideologically motivated. You and I agreed it was an insurrection at the time. So it's bizarre for Vance to go on TV or go online and say the exact opposite of what both the official statistics say and the think tanks say. All of our evidence tells us. I mean, there was a Democratic lawmaker, Chris, I don't know how many times we have to say this, who was murdered in her home with her husband in June by a Trump supporter. And Donald Trump today said, who? When he was asked about it, he said, who?
So, Mehdi, one quick thing. I do not think January 6th was an insurrection. I thought that it was all kinds of crimes.
You said it at the time, Chris.
I just don't.
You called it an insurrection at the time. You did.
No,
I checked your Twitter before I came on air.
Thought.
Okay,
go ahead, show it to me.
Check it
But
afterwards.
I never thought that they were trying to take over the government. That's what an insurrection is. But it doesn't matter. It was bad. But we're dealing with new bad stuff. But
it was political violence. We can agree, right, Chris? It was political violence.
100%. It was political violence, but this was a murder for what somebody was saying. Well,
they were trying to murder Mike Pence, Chris. They were trying to murder Mike Pence.
Well, but they didn't. Those are just words. And if you killed somebody for saying it, you would have had a problem.
Hold on, because he survived? Because Mike Pence survived an assassination attempt, it's fine?
Well, it's no assassination attempt. They never had hands on him. They didn't do anything to him. But my point is speech versus actions, okay? But Ken, speech versus actions.
Killing of a Democratic lawmaker this summer, murder.
Yeah, Hortman was killed. Two people were killed. Yes.
That was murder.
Go ahead, Ken.
And Charlie Kirk's killing was murder. Speech is not violence, which is something we hear a lot in the...
This debate between Mehdi Hasan, Ken Cuccinelli, and Chris Cuomo perfectly captures how dangerous and how disconnected from reality right-wing rhetoric has become. When Cuomo and Cuccinelli insist that speech isn't violence, they're not just oversimplifying the issue, they're ignoring decades of legal precedent and historical reality. You don't have to throw a punch to be responsible for the harm that follows your words. History makes that clear. Charles Manson never committed the murders himself, yet he spent the rest of his life in prison because his words motivated others to kill. The law has always recognized that incitement matters. So when Donald Trump tells a crowd to fight like hell on January 6th, or when right-wing media figures constantly frame their political opponents as enemies of the country, that isn't harmless expression. That's incitement. And incitement has real, sometimes deadly consequences. Mehdi called this out exactly the way it needed to be called out. He didn't raise his voice or turn it into a shouting match. He stayed composed and backed up his argument with facts. Facts showing that right-wing extremism has accounted for the majority of domestic terror-related killings in the United States for over a decade. That conclusion isn't controversial. It's supported by the ADL, researchers at the University of Maryland, and even statements from Trump's own FBI director, Christopher Wray. Yet figures like J.D. Vance and those in Charlie Kirk's orbit keep distorting that reality. Why? Because they need a villain. They need to invent a violent left in order to justify authoritarian policies and crackdowns, often on the very free speech they claim to defend when it benefits them. When Mehdi compares this moment to McCarthyism, it isn't hyperbole. The pattern is familiar. Manufacture fear, accuse dissenters of subversion, and then use that fear to consolidate power. History shows that authoritarian movements almost always follow this script: create a mythical enemy, demonize opposition, and wrap it all in the language of patriotism. And when Chris Cuomo pushes back by downplaying January 6th as not an insurrection, it shows just how far this reframing has gone. If a violent mob storming the Capitol while chanting "Hang Mike Pence" doesn't qualify as an insurrection, then the word has lost all meaning. Intent matters. Incitement matters. Words matter. What's happening in this clip goes far beyond a debate about Charlie Kirk or J.D. Vance's narratives. It's about whether we're still willing to acknowledge that language has consequences, and that objective truth still exists. Mehdi Hasan isn't just debating political figures here. He's pushing back against a broader effort to rewrite reality itself.
Violence is violence. And one of the reasons it's important to reject the speech as violence, which is one of the excuses I'm hearing an awful lot about excusing Charlie Kirk's murder, is because then you devalue the significance on a moral basis of actual violence. And it's important, an opportunity for unity that I think still exists is for everyone to reject violence for political ends. Chris, you'll remember I said this over and over and over back in 2020 when I was the deputy secretary and cities across the country were burning. And then elected officials were very accepting, frankly, and excusing. Some of them were helping in the form of bailing people out, violent protesters. You even noted that early on in that process that these things don't always have to be peaceful. And I disagree. They do have to be peaceful. That's something we should all, left and right, be able to agree on. It's still there to be a unifying point, the rejection of violence, which is something Charlie Kirk lived and died for. People who actually watched him interact with people who disagreed with him. You know, you and I are very passionate. Mehdi's obviously very passionate. Charlie was incredibly level in how he communicated with people. He was firm, but he never got angry. He didn't call people names. He respected them. He told them he respected them. And frankly, it's a model for all of us, left and right, to emulate, not the violence.
Well, I don't know about emulating everything about it, but that's not the point. Two quick things, and then back to you, Mehdi. The first thing is that I never said that protests aren't supposed to be peaceful. I know what the First Amendment is. What I said was, at the time when the protests first started, there was so much pushback against the speech. What are they saying? They're saying things at cops. They're saying the ugliest things, the worst things. And I said, what do you think they're going to do? Sing slave hymns and then go home? You know, nobody ever said it's going to be peaceful out there. They're going to say a lot of things that are going to bother you. That's the price of our freedom and our democracy in this country. That was my point. Now, Mehdi, the idea of, is it time, place, and manner that, hey, I condemn this. This is unacceptable, what happened to Charlie Kirk. But he said a lot of things that were fill in the blank of extremist and abhorrent things. Why put the right now?
So, Chris, I'm glad you asked me that question. It's a perfect timing because with respect to Ken made a very good point about rejecting violence. I agree with Ken. The problem, of course, is that Ken's former boss, Donald Trump, pardoned a bunch of politically violent people earlier this year. He's even dangled pardons in front of the kidnappers.
So did Joe Biden.
The attempt to, I'm not here to defend Joe Biden, but Donald Trump pardoned a bunch of political extremists who attacked the Capitol, and he's also, Chris, dangled pardons in front of the people who wanted to kidnap and maybe kill Gretchen Whitmer, like horrible political extremists. He's talked about pardoning them as well. So that's a real problem, and we need the president, as you said in your introduction, to really lead on this and use this killing of his friend to say, you know what, all of us tone it down. This is a president who's called his enemies scum, vermin, animals. You know, Chris, better than me what he's called his political enemies, including you. So that's what we need from the president. We're not getting it from the president. We're getting more kind of talk of pardons. The other issue which you asked about Charlie Kirk, look, I differ from you on this, Chris, and this is what we argued on Twitter. I think public figures are not private figures. I think public figures, when they die, of course we should be respectful to their families. I've said time and again that it breaks my heart to think about what his children are going through, what his widow is going through. It's horrific what happened to him. I can't even watch that video. I refuse to watch that video of what happened to him. But he's a public figure. I'm a public figure. Chris, you're a public figure. When we die, people are going to look at what we said and say, well, I agree with him on this, I agree with him on that. And the problem is Ken and the right are trying to almost deify him. What Ken just said is not true, that Charlie never called for violence, that Charlie was level. Charlie called for me to be deported from America because he didn't like a monologue I did on COVID. He called for Joe Biden to be executed by death penalty. We can go down the list. I know you don't want to hear. Let's not make this a Charlie Kirk rhetoric thing. But I don't know what else to say. When I hear Ken saying things that I think are untrue, then I have to respond. You know me, Chris, it's in my nature. I have to respond and say, well, that's not true. Here are the facts. Just last week, the day before he died, the day before he was brutally murdered, he said that Islam is the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America. I don't think that's rhetoric that people should be emulating. I find that deeply offensive rhetoric. Obviously, it doesn't justify killing him. Nothing justifies killing him. But please don't tell me that he was a level-headed person who never insulted or abused anyone. That's just not true. He asked for people to post bail on the guy who attacked Paul Pelosi in his home, a violent extremist, Trump supporter, election denier, who attacked Paul Pelosi in his home, is now in prison for attempted murder. Charlie called for bail to be posted for him by an American hero. So that's the kind of rhetoric I don't think we need. Or emulate.
Mehdi, what is the difference? What is the difference between telling the truth and rationalizing the murder? That's why I talk about time, place, and manner. That when you say, look, this is unacceptable, but he said a lot of terrible things, it sounds like you're not as upset that he was murdered because he said those things.
With respect, Chris, that's not what I said. I said his murder is inexcusable. I've said that consistently, as have we all. But I was responding to Ken saying that Charlie was X, Y, Z. If Ken and the right, and Ken, I'm not picking on you, but the right in general, were not treating him like a new MLK. I'm seeing people saying he was a literal saint. He should have a statue put up in Congress. Chris, am I supposed to just let that go and not say, we probably shouldn't have a statue in Congress for a man who says Islam is a religion being used to slit the throat of the West, that Muslims like me are conquerors? This is the kind of stuff he said. Am I supposed to not respond to that political rhetoric?
Well, I think it's about how you respond to it and when you respond to it. The guy was just murdered. I mean, there's a reason why when people die, if you go to the wake, you don't stare down at the box, and say the guy was kind of a bum too. And that's why your interview with Omar bothered a lot of people.
If I may,
This exchange between Mehdi Hasan, Chris Cuomo, and Ken Cuccinelli deserves close attention, not just for what was said, but for what it reveals about the current state of American political discourse. Moments like this expose a familiar strategy on the right: exploit tragedy, erase accountability, and then shame anyone who refuses to play along with selective outrage. It starts with Chris Cuomo's "too soon" argument. On the surface, it sounds reasonable. Let families grieve, avoid politicizing loss, show restraint. But in practice, that standard is never applied evenly. Donald Trump and his allies didn't wait even a full day before turning Charlie Kirk's death into a political weapon. Before facts were established, before investigators could determine motive, the blame was already being assigned to the left, framed as a political assassination, and used to justify calls for censorship and investigations into progressive groups. So when Cuomo asks Mehdi, "Why bring this up now?" he's missing the reality of what already happened. The right brought it up first, not for reflection, but for manipulation. Mehdi wasn't politicizing a tragedy, he was responding to its exploitation. Mehdi was also very clear about something important. Charlie Kirk's murder was horrific. His family didn't deserve that pain. Nothing justifies killing someone over their views. That point was never in dispute. But public figures don't exist in a vacuum. When someone builds a career around influence, rhetoric, and mass reach, their record becomes part of the conversation, even after death. That isn't cruelty, that's accountability. When Mehdi referenced Kirk's past statements, calling for Joe Biden's execution, advocating for Mehdi's deportation, or supporting bail for the man who violently attacked Paul Pelosi, he wasn't celebrating a death. He was pushing back against the mythology already being constructed. Because this is a consistent pattern within the MAGA movement. They canonize their own. They did it with Ashley Babbitt after January 6th. They did it with Kyle Rittenhouse. They even reframed January 6th rioters as hostages instead of criminals. And now, predictably, they're doing the same with Charlie Kirk. The goal is always the same: transform agitators into martyrs, provocation into patriotism, and extremism into virtue. Mehdi simply refused to participate in that rewriting of history. That refusal is what unsettled them. Ken Cuccinelli's claim that Charlie Kirk lived and died for peace is a striking example of this revisionism. The record tells a different story. Kirk built his platform on outrage, demeaning entire groups, stoking fear of immigrants, Muslims, and political opponents, and branding cruelty as courage. He wasn't a unifier. He was a divider who profited from polarization. When figures like Cuccinelli attempt to sanitize that legacy on national television, they're not honoring the dead. They're laundering extremism into respectability. Chris Cuomo then leaned into a moral argument that criticism so soon after death is inherently disrespectful that it undermines empathy. But that framing creates a false choice. You can grieve a human loss while rejecting the ideology that fueled someone's influence. You can show compassion for a family without erasing the harm their loved one caused. Mehdi understands that distinction. His tone never crossed into mockery or celebration, only clarity. The uncomfortable truth is that Charlie Kirk's rhetoric helped normalize a culture of dehumanization that now dominates the American right. Ignoring that reality in the name of politeness isn't empathy, it's intellectual surrender. There's also a deeper hypocrisy at play. The right routinely accuses the left of excusing violence. Yet Donald Trump pardons extremists who attempted to overturn an election, labels insurrectionists as patriots, and flirts with pardons for people who plotted kidnappings. That isn't inconsistency, that's complicity. Mehdi was right to call it out, because silence is how authoritarian movements advance. What this debate ultimately reveals is how selective empathy is used as a political weapon. When their own are harmed, the right demands reverence, silence, and unity. But when their opponents are attacked, they mock, deflect, and spread conspiracies. Remember, when Paul Pelosi was assaulted with a hammer, Charlie Kirk supported bail for the attacker. That was his record. Now, after his own violent death, the same crowd demands sainthood. The contradiction speaks for itself. Mehdi Hasan isn't being disrespectful. He's being consistent. He applies the same moral standard regardless of political affiliation. That consistency is exactly why right-wing figures despise him. He refuses to let emotion overwrite facts. He doesn't confuse compassion with amnesia. So no, it isn't too soon. It's too important. Every time the MAGA machine succeeds in mythologizing one of its own, the narrative hardens, the lies deepen, and the next generation grows up mistaking hate for heroism. Mehdi is refusing to let that happen, and more journalists should follow his example. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree that Mehdi was right to challenge the hypocrisy in real time? Or do you think there's ever a moment when falsehoods should be left unchallenged as they spread? If you found this breakdown valuable, give the video a like, subscribe, and help us push back against the manufactured myths shaping our politics. This is America Unmasked, and I'll see you in the next one.